All right, you're listening to HawkeTalk. I'm here today with Aaron Kirman. How are you?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
Good. Thanks for coming on. So, got to start it out as we talked about before. I assume you came out of the womb into a $150 million house, immediately put it on the market, got your first deal done, right?
People assume that all the time. Yeah. But it could not be farther from the truth, actually. My dad was in trucking. My mom was an elementary school teacher. Grew up in a very modest family.
Where were you born?
Remember, I'm sorry.
Where were you from?
Yeah. We in Reseda,
Okay,
California.
nice.
Yeah. In the valley, and I remember I was on the periphery and there were all these expensive houses, not very far away, but far away. And I would ride my bike over to them when I was like 6. And I shouldn't tell people this, but I actually broke into houses that were a lot more expensive than mine. And I remember pretending to want to sell them. And I was like, no joke, I was like 6, 7, 8.
Oh, so where do you think that came from? Like, how do even knowing that that's what you do is sell houses? Like,
I don't even remember. I don't even know. I remember a friend. I never even said this out loud, but a friend's dad was a real estate agent and had one of those key cards. And I remember taking the key card and going into all the empty houses. And some of them were like really expensive at the time. And I would ride my little bike and hop over the gate. And I just remember kind of studying the way the other half lived and thinking, this is pretty fabulous. This is pretty great. And then I would go home to my parents' house and we had like holes in our carpet and it was super dated and it was just super not it was very modest home and that was kind of my upbringing. But I always knew that there was something else.
and so growing up, what were your like interests, your hobbies? Did that just retain? Were you into like interior design and homes and through middle school, high school? Was that always part of it?
So I had a lot of challenges growing up. I couldn't really speak very well. I had a horrible speech impediment. I couldn't say the letter R, so I literally couldn't say my own name. I was severely dyslexic, so I was really had trouble in school. Reading and writing was almost impossible. I remember I had to cheat on almost every test, starting from first grade going on to God knows when. And so my academic career was always really difficult. On top of that, I was gay, and I knew I was gay at a very young age, so I didn't really necessarily connect with people. And this goes, I'm 42 now, so
Mhm.
it wasn't, that it wasn't like as cool as it is today. So
Yeah,
that was
as
kind of
accepted.
complicated for me. And so I remember growing up, I was always a little bit of an outsider because I couldn't excel in school. I didn't have a whole lot of friends. I couldn't speak very well. And the only thing that was really great was I had a really supportive family that helped me get through it. But all those things kind of led to me loving real estate. I always loved real estate so much to the fact that, and I don't even know if it was that, but I remember when I was like young, I used to make my parents look at houses, even though they couldn't afford to and had no intention of buying houses. I would literally make them drive around on Sundays, and including I remember wasting real estate agents' time and getting into these fancy cars and making them pretend like they were going to buy something. So it was always kind of in my DNA.
Did your parents ever go like, where is this coming from? Or just like they just were supportive and accepted it, just said, no, this is fun.
I think they didn't even know what hit them. Like we would ride bikes and I would be like, let's stop at this open house. And we would meet a fancy real estate agent, in the neighborhood. I'd be like, we got to go look at this. And I was on a mission to get them to change that whole carpet. I remember for 10 years, we had these holes in our carpet. I was like, this is just not, it just didn't feel organic to me. And so looking back though, I think that it was my saving grace because I couldn't read, I couldn't write, I couldn't talk, but I always knew what I wanted to do, and I always had a passion for houses.
Yep.
And I think it was very lucky to have that trajectory.
Yeah. And so when did you start like actually, obviously, as you said, you were touring around, but was there a point in high school or something where you actually started like turning it into a job,
Yeah.
or what'd you do work wise?
So I remember, I didn't get into college. I didn't get into USC, and they wrote me a rejection letter. And I remember writing them back saying, "How could you not let me in? Yes, I have bad grades, and yes, I don't stack up, but here's why you should let me in." And funny enough, I got in on
Really?
yeah, like I got a letter from USC and they said, hey, why don't you come in and meet, one of the people in charge of admissions. I went in, I met him, and I got a temporary admission.
Oh,
And we couldn't really afford USC at the time. My family couldn't afford USC. So I said, listen, my brother was at West Point Military Academy, and he's very different than me. He's like just a different kind of player. And I said, look, he's on scholarship. Why don't I join ROTC? They'll pay for college. And then, I'll do a couple years in the military. And anybody who knows me knows that that's the furthest thing for me. I don't like, the military is not for me in any way, shape, or form. So I did it for the first 6 months and I got kicked out of the ROTC. They're like, we're not paying for school anymore. You're not for us. This is not a match.
What was what was their issue?
Everything. Like, I'm a dyslexic. I mean, I barely knew how to put on my boots. I know that sounds terrible, but they were complicated. And, I was in college and, I had this new life freedom of, college and, you had to get up at 5 o'clock, which was not for me at the time.
Yeah.
And, I was, learning how to be an adult, and that just wasn't my moment. And so I remember thinking, wow, now I can't really go to school because I have no money.
Yeah.
And so I thought to myself, all right, well, let's, kind of check out real estate. So I worked for a couple of real estate companies, and I actually got fired from every real estate company I worked for, not as an agent, but as like an intern, an assistant, because all of the things that I'm not good at, I wasn't good at as an assistant.
Right.
And I got fired from like 3 different places. And finally I thought, okay, well, I definitely can't work for somebody else. Things aren't going great. Maybe I should get my license and try to see if I can do it by myself.
I'm curious because a lot of people at that point would be like, I'm not meant for this industry versus like, oh, I'm just not meant to work for them. I'll do it myself. Like, where did that confidence, sort of that side of it, do you think came from?
I don't know the answer to that. The thing was, ironically, even though I was like kind of a big failure, like I couldn't hold a job, I didn't do well in school, like all the odds were like not in my favor. I always knew that I just always knew that I had it in me to do well. Like I never doubted that I was going to be successful. Now, what that meant, I don't think I knew that. You know what I mean? But I always had confidence. Even when I got fired, I mean, yes, it's a letdown, and you're like, why am I here? But I always felt like I had that skill to be able to do well. And so once I got my real estate license, it was like the floodgates opened, and all of a sudden, all the things that I couldn't do well and all the things that I didn't do well for other people, I just sort of got together for myself. And I did pretty well pretty soon. And I remember my mom went on one of my first, I went on a listing appointment. I was like 18 or 19. And somehow the timing was with, like, somebody called me and I was like, Mom, we have to go on this appointment. And my mom said she listened to me and she was shocked how good and competent I sounded. And she said, I remember it sounded like you were in the business for like 25 years.
Well, and in some ways you weren't 25 years, but you had spent so much time looking at houses and understanding them and having a passion for it. Like, got to be honest, obviously we all know a lot of agents and brokers, like most are doing it because they think it's a way to make money, not because they actually are passionate about the product.
For sure. And back then, real estate was not cool. Like I remember I would tell my friends I'm going to be a real estate agent, and they're like, "That's what my grandma does." Like it was it was like an antiquated industry where it didn't have the glamour and the television shows and all the stuff that you see today. But it was always super natural, and it was the one I always tell people, like in life, there's a lot of things I don't know: politics, love, certain relationships. But real estate, once I got my license and I didn't work for somebody else, I was like the one thing I knew very naturally. It came very easy for me. And it was just like an instinct that I always was able to follow.
Yeah. And so how did you get your first listings? Like a lot of people, starting out, there's a lot of people, I had my real estate license, by the way. I was in real estate I started in commercial real estate a week to the day before Lehman Brothers collapsed. And
wow.
And so as a commercial agent at Sperry Van Ness in Brentwood, and 6 months in, realized this is going to probably be a bad time to be in real estate, and I can't afford to not make any money. So got into the internet, which worked out. But I've seen that like that first, unless you've got the grind in it, like how did you get your first listings, those first people to trust you at 18?
I remember I was at the time we had floor calls where you were just sat in your office and you hoped that somebody was going to call. And I remember somebody called, and at the time he wanted a Richard Neutra. And I said, I didn't say, he goes, I'm looking for a Neutra. And I said, great, I can help you find a Neutra. I had no idea what that meant. I was like, what is a Neutra? And I remember, this is, it was a different era. So I realized it was this famous architect, super well known, did a lot of mid-century houses. And so I said, look, I'll find you one. Come, the guy was from San Francisco. He's like, I was like, come to LA, we'll get it. Well, I didn't realize how hard it was to find a Neutra, but they're like treasures that, they don't come up a dime a dozen. So he came to LA, and I remember he was in my car, and this was like my first client. And I remember I couldn't, I'm dyslexic to this day, right? So I remember I had to pull up all these Yahoo maps, and like I had, we didn't have our smartphones back then. So I had all these maps directing me, and I got really lost. And we were looking at like 4 or 5 houses, not Neutras. And I remember I got to the point where I had to call a real estate agent and tell them where I am to pick me up, to take us to the house. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, this guy's never going to call me again. This has been the biggest disaster. And he didn't, by the way, he never called me again. And 3 months later, a Richard Neutra popped up, and I said, I found your house. You got to come back to LA. You're going to buy this house. He bought this house. And it's really funny because it's the same guy has been my client for like 25 years.
Oh, yeah.
And it and it set me into this interesting path of like architecture and design and fashion. And so that one random phone call, was such a random call, really helped build my career. And it's something I'm super grateful for, because without that call, who knows?
Yeah.
But that one guy happened to be friends with a lot of celebrities and a lot of people in the, in fashion and arts and entertainment. And it gave me this client base that was actually amazing.
That's awesome. And so it really was, and that, as you said, that one guy, he didn't call you back for 3 months. It took 3 months to get back in touch with him. During that 3 months, how was it? Like, were you questioning
Hard.
it?
No, listen, like anything, it's like Rome wasn't built overnight. And no, but I wasn't doing terrible. Like I was inching at it, and I was hustling, and I was grinding, and I started getting listings. Like people would refer me, and I would get them. And once I got them, they weren't the prize listings. They weren't the homes that I sell today, but they were a start, and they got my foot in the door. And I always knew, like I had the vision, like, okay, I have one house now. I need 2 houses. I got 2 houses. I need 3. And I remember I would visualize a page of listings and be like, I want a page full of listings.
Yeah.
And within a couple of years, like I had a page of listings, and I remember going, I want 2 pages of listings. And I remember like marketing and advertising, and I remember thinking, this is the visualization that I wanted, and this is what I saw. And then I remember through every path, there's always a change, right? And so I was selling a couple $100,000 houses in the Valley. And I remember thinking, God, it would be great to increase the price point. And so, every tweak I had, I was like, well, how am I going to do that? And so for all the problems I had in my life, I would say one of the great things that I always remembered was I always had a visualization for where I wanted to go. And I always figured out a plan of action to try to get there.
Yeah. And I think that's so important. Like when you have a path or a goal in mind, you can start to build the pieces along the way, and you're running in the right direction or wrong. So makes a lot lot of sense. Sounds familiar.
And it was even to this day, I always tell people, like, you're going to win and you're going to lose. And that's life, right? And it's like, as long as when you lose, you can kind of evaluate every time I lose, I'm like, well, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? And how can I make sure I don't do that again? And sometimes we do it again. I'm like, what did I do wrong? Like, I'm going to learn this lesson eventually, right?
No, that's my biggest pet peeve with myself. I think it's the thing that pains me the most is when I make the same mistake twice. I'm like, I was supposed to learn that.
Oh my God, you're like, fuck. You're like, fuck, how many times? And there's certain mistake that I've made 100 times. And
Yep.
and every time I'm like, fuck, I'm not gonna make that mistake again. But the problem is the mistake is part of the life. Like, like I know, one of our mistakes that we make all the time is like immediate communication, so important. But when you get busy, that becomes very challenging, right? Yep. And so one day we will get it down, but we still don't have it down yet.
Yep. No, it's 100%. And so I'm curious, what do you think, like, as you said, it took you about 2 years to get that page of listings at the same time. Like, what was it that about you that was it just you got intros from this first guy that you found that architect for, or like what was it that made people go, I'm going to give you the shot at 19, 20 years old versus the person that's tried and true, or my cousin or whoever else they were going for? Like, why were you able to get those listings?
So at the time, like my youth was a disadvantage because people didn't want to hire young. And today wealth patterns have changed. There's so many wealthy young people that the perception of youth in business is now, it's actually probably a good thing. Yeah. Whereas when I was young, it wasn't. I would say that one of the things that led me to be where I am is my trials and tribulations actually got me to be successful. Like the fact that when I was a kid, I couldn't speak, I couldn't talk, I couldn't communicate, the fact that I couldn't read, the fact that I couldn't write, all of those things sucked as a kid. But what it did as an adult was it made me hone in on human nature and human beings. And I was able to study the human being, and it was able to help me build my interpersonal relationship so that as a 21-year-old or 22, when I was just starting, I really knew how to communicate with people. I knew how to really connect with people. And I really, and I know this sounds weird, like I wasn't a master salesman there then, but I was a salesman.
Yeah.
And I knew how to sell. Like today I call myself like a master salesman because I really think I'm great at
good enough. Yeah.
Yeah. And selling is not selling, right?
Right.
But,
exactly.
But I learned how to listen and how to understand what it is that people want so that I could do my best to deliver.
Got it. And so obviously, as you said, over time, you kind of set your sights on bigger houses and better areas, so to speak, more expensive areas. How did you kind of elevate to the point you're at now? I mean, you've had literally some of the biggest listings in history, correct?
Yeah. We've sold the most expensive houses in the world. We're now at $8 billion in sales. And we're lucky enough to sell really to some of the most famous, most wealthy, and most expensive properties.
And so when was the first one? Where was that first step of like, you went from like I get the progression from like $200,000 houses, maybe getting into $1 million, 2 million in that process. But how do you then break through to being the guy to get the next, $50 million house, $80 million, whatever that is?
Yeah. So I over the course of like 15 years, I had a very strong, I was successful. I did good. I was like, people knew my name. At the time, actually, I'm not even sure I was that well liked. I was actually pretty insecure. And there were so many lessons I learned along the way, which
I've heard your reputation is great if it means anything.
Well, thank you. And now it is, but I have to work on it. That layer of insecurity as a kid that led to things that I could have done better, right? I felt insecure. So if I wasn't your guy, I would lie and say I was, right? Yep. Now I'm pretty clear about, well, if I'm not your guy, I'm not your guy. Like if it's not a match, it's not a match. But I remember what really got me, what propelled me to the big boy listings and girl listings. A $50 million listing was, I remember I was having a horrible year. I mean, I was a top producer, but I was having a really bad year. I had bad clients. And I remember telling my life coach, I was like, I'm just miserable. And she goes, get rid of every one of your clients, fire them. And I was really miserable that year. And I went on a trip to Brazil and I came back. And I literally was like, okay, I fired every single one of my clients. I was at ground zero. And not only did I fire every one of my clients, but I was at a very safe company. It was like this prestige. It was the most prestigious luxury brand in Los Angeles.
Which one?
And it was strong and it was consistent. And I remember there were two.
Which brand was it?
It's Hilton and Highland.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Super luxury brand. And I was one of their top producers, but there were two other people there that started inching in on my territory, and they were top producers. And I remember it was like leading to this lack of self-esteem for me. And I remember losing my way, and I remember kind of searching for something else. And I was going to start this technology company with somebody, and this guy said, "Well, go to any company. It doesn't matter what you're at. Go to a company that's going to give you the highest split." And I remember I met this company, and they needed a luxury presence at the time, but they didn't have a very established name, and so they're like, "We want you to build our luxury brand." And it was the biggest decision for me because I wasn't sure I was ready for that. And I went from like a very prestigious company to a company that wasn't prestigious in luxury. They had 10 offices. And I made it, and I said, "Look, I'm probably," and funny enough, all of a sudden the universe changed, and I started making so much money at Hilton and Highland, and the world started opening up. And I told the owner at the time, I was like, "I'm not going to leave." And I was like, "Unless you're making me an offer that I can't refuse." Sure enough, he made me an offer I can't refuse. And I remember the owner of that company, basically at the time was like, not only said I left, he said I was fired, right? It was a very dramatic breakup.
Oh, yeah.
But when I started at this new company, I knew I needed to make a splash. It was like my time. And so I linked up with as many $50 million houses as I could. I remember launching a new company. All of a sudden, I never had a $50 million listing. I never even had a $30 million listing. But when I launched at this new company, I was like, this is my time. I'm going to do it. And I launched at this huge house, 50 million at the time, which was a lot.
Yeah.
And I just changed everything I did. Like all the bad that I did, I changed the good. All the insecurities I had, I was like, I'm now a leader. I'm going to be a leader, and I'm going to lead well, and I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to be kind, and I'm going to be generous, and I'm going to make sure that I do this right. And from that generosity led to more generosity, led to more listings. And all of a sudden, a Saudi client would call me from Saudi Arabia, princes, kings, queens, celebrities, and all of a sudden it just started to roll.
Got it. And so how did you get that first $50 million? You're moving to a new brokerage. You've never had a listing that size. You don't need to say who, but like, how did that listing come to be? Like, how were you able to secure that? Was it just brute force? I'm taking it. Like,
it was, to be honest, an extreme. It was like he knew me. We were friends. I pulled favors. We really pulled favors. We really inched our way. We took a reduction on commission. Like we do what we don't like to do, but I did what I needed to do to launch.
Yep. No, and listen, in those kind of situations, that makes sense. And that's where, on a $50 million home, if you're going to knock 1% off of it, you get their attention.
Yeah. And it was a defining moment for me because it was the make it or break it moment. I think a lot of people wanted me to fail.
No.
And I was like, I'm not gonna fail. I'm gonna take this moment. And I went from like a major company to what was a smaller company. It didn't have a brand name. And all of a sudden people took notice of what we were doing. And people are like, wow, like this little company all of a sudden has all this.
Yeah.
And we built a division that I was very proud of. It was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. And so at this point, as you said, what was the most expensive house in history? What was that house that you sold?
I sold, and this is not in the United States, but we sold a $300 million house. I can't talk about it, but it's, abroad.
Yeah.
And then in LA, the next one is 65.
65.
So, and we also have marketed, the mountain and all these other things. But yeah, we've had some super expensive houses. Now in LA, we're seeing numbers at 150, and we're seeing these crazy numbers. We're seeing these,
but they're
now
not,
the numbers
they're listed at 150 is what I'm saying. But
yeah, I mean, we have like three or four sales now at 150, which is
really
interesting.
Yeah. And listen, a lot of people have money. It could happen. Everything's kind of inflated.
Listen, it's the wealthy are getting wealthier for sure.
Yeah, 100%. And so what's next? What do you think? What do you want to do from here? You've kind of, as you said, you've hit some of the most expensive houses in the world. Like, is there something you're building towards, or do you just like it, you love it, you want to keep going?
No, what's next? So I went from being like a very individual person to like running a team now. So I have a team of like 115. I love the brand. Like I went from my own name to building a brand, right? We're running a team and the AKG brand. I love the success of my agents. I love helping them succeed. I still love succeeding as well. But I love business in general. I love strategy. I love the wins. I love the brand building. We shot a show on CNBC, Listing Impossible, did really well. Working on media and TV. Now real estate is not just being a broker, right? Being a good real estate agent is like actually being like a media personality. Like, we were always on TV and media and showing houses and YouTube and television networks. And then, always pitching stories. And then we are cross connecting. And now technology is such an important part that we're building a technology app that hopefully, is going to be amazing based on intelligence, telling us who's looking at what, even if we're not familiar. And so our list of agenda items is huge between the app and media and television and brand building and building our team.
That's awesome. Got it. And so last question for me, for someone starting out that just wants to pursue their dreams, whether in real estate or something else, what's one piece of advice you'd give that you wish you received or you did receive that you think would really help in the right direction?
Yeah, I think that knowing what you want is literally 80% of the game. And a lot of people come to me because they want to be successful and they're like, I want to be like you, or I want the money, and that comes with success, like money and things and learning. It all comes, it's part of the course, right? But knowing what you want will get you there, because once you know what you want, all you have to do is plan it out and strategize and visualize and imagine and make tweaks. And if you fail, failing is part of the success, because if you don't fail, you're not going to learn, right? So from every failure is a great lesson to learn. And the people that fail the most are the people that are the most successful. And so I always tell people, don't be afraid of failure. Fail. Because when you fail, you will learn not to fail again, right? And really know what it is, know what you're good at, know what you're bad at, and know what you want. Because once you have that, all you have to do is map it out. And there is something so easy about mapping it out. Because once you map, you have a plan. And I always tell people, like, I fail every day. To this day, I fail, right? But as long as I have a plan to not fail again, I feel good. I'm like, well, that was a wash. But you know what? I know how not to do that again. And that makes you feel good. And
you live to fight another day. You keep going.
Live to fight another day. And the other thing that I really think is so important is, enjoy whatever you do. Because if you don't enjoy it, you're not going to be successful. But B, in order to enjoy what you do, authenticity is like so important, right? We have to know who we are. We have to know what we're good at. We have to know what we're bad at. We have to know what we like. And as long as you have all those things, like, we live in a world of possibilities. Like we are so lucky. I mean, look, we have a lot of problems in America, and there's a lot of issues, and but we live in a world where, honestly, like, I'm a son of basically a trucker, a trucking industry, and today I'm selling the most expensive houses of some of the most famous people and wealthy, and it's like I just pinch myself, because I'm like, how, sometimes I ask myself, how did that happen? Like, I wish I could tell you. I actually sometimes don't know myself, but I think that it's possible for anybody to get to where they want to be with the right determination and focus.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think listen, the amount of success you're going to have, I think, has a lot of luck to do with it too, and random circumstance. But to be some level of successful is exactly what you said. It's focusing, knowing where you want to be and going for it. Like, whether you'd be selling $50 million homes, $80 million homes, or $150 million homes is, I think, there's a little bit of serendipity in there too. But you'd have some level of success no matter what, because you have that.
But I'll say something. That word luck is a very weird word. And sometimes I find myself on a bad day going, oh, that was so unlucky. Why am I like, and I feel like we have to be careful with that word luck, because I do believe there is a layer of luck, right? It happens. And I think there's a level of some DNA in all of us that's like, you know, I always tell some certain successful people, I'm like, I'll never bet against that person because that person just has it in their DNA to know what they're doing. But that DNA also comes from like study, passion, visualization, like understanding who they are. So those people that I look at and those people that are the luckiest people in the world, they knew what they wanted. They had it down. They had a vision. They had a plan, and they made their own luck.
Yeah, that's fair. I agree with that. Well, awesome. Aaron, this has been super awesome. Thank you for coming on HawkeTalk.
Thank you for having me, and hope to see you real soon.
Definitely.